The war lasted 11 days before he walked into my throne room and ruined everything. I had been winning. My name is Queen Thessera of the Valorn Sovereignty. I command the most devastating military force in 4-star systems. My warships have ended conflicts that other civilizations spent centuries trying to resolve. My generals have never lost a campaign. My throne room floor is made from the compressed hull material of 17 enemy vessels that made the mistake of testing my patience. I had declared war on the humans 8 months ago. Not because they attacked us. Not because they threatened us. Because they were expanding. Quietly, steadily, without apparent aggression, building outposts and relay stations and small permanent settlements along the corridor that separated their space from mine. Each structure individually meaningless. Together, over time, a wall. I do not tolerate walls being built around my sovereignty. The military assessment was straightforward. Humans were new. 40 years in space. No significant combat history. Their technology was functional but not advanced. Their numbers were substantial but their military capacity was unproven. A contained engagement along the corridor would establish the boundary clearly and without extended conflict. My generals said it would take 3 weeks. It took 11 days to realize something was wrong. Not because humans were fighting back effectively. They were fighting back, but not effectively in the way my strategic models defined effective. They were not matching our firepower. They were not attempting to outmaneuver our formations. They were doing something that my senior tactical analyst, Commander Reth, described in her briefing on Day 8 as strategically incoherent and operationally inexplicable. They were slowing us down, not stopping us. Not defeating us. Every engagement we won. Every position we targeted we took. But each one cost more time than projected. Each advance was shorter than calculated. They were not trying to win. They were trying to make winning take as long as possible. I did not understand why until Day 11. On Day 11, Commander Reth came to my throne room at the 4th hour with a sequence of intercepts from human communication channels that she had been analyzing for 36 hours without sleep. She put the decoded messages on the display and stood back and said nothing because she understood that what the messages showed required a moment before response was useful. What they showed was evacuation. Every human settlement in the conflict corridor. Every outpost, every relay station, every small permanent installation that my military had been systematically targeting. All of it had been in the process of evacuation since 4 days before my forces arrived. The structures we had been destroying had been empty. The positions we had taken had been abandoned hours before we reached them. They had known we were coming. Not specifically. Not the date or the tactical approach. But they had known that the expansion was provocative and they had begun quietly moving people out of the likely conflict zone before we moved in. The structures were bait. The engagement was theater. And while we had been conducting 11 days of efficient military operations against empty buildings, approximately 40,000 human civilians had been safely relocated to positions outside our operational range. Not a single human had died. I stared at the display for a long time. Reth waited. How long have they known? I asked. Based on the evacuation timeline, at minimum 6 months, she said. Possibly longer. The logistics suggest this was planned well before any formal declaration. They evacuated 40,000 people in secret over 6 months without our intelligence detecting it. Yes. While continuing normal operations in the corridor, while building new structures, while doing nothing that would indicate they were aware of what was coming. Yes, I was quiet. Who planned this? I asked. Reth put another file on the display. Personnel record. Human military. The image showed a man in his late 30s, unremarkable in appearance, with the specific quality in his expression of someone who is always thinking about something other than what is directly in front of him. His name was General Cole Marin, Human Outer Corridor Defense Command. The record noted prior service in 3 contested zone operations and 1 diplomatic crisis resolution and an academic background that included, unusually for a military officer, a specialization in conflict de-escalation theory. De-escalation theory. He had de-escalated 40,000 people out of range before I fired a single shot. I was looking at the file and thinking about what it meant when Reth added, quietly, the information that completed the picture. He is currently in the building, she said. I looked at her. He arrived at the outer gate 11 minutes ago, she said. Alone. No escort, no weapons. He presented his identification and asked to speak with you directly. She paused. He said to tell you that he apologizes for the short notice, but the situation seemed to warrant an in-person conversation. The throne room was silent. He walked into a military installation of a civilization that declared war on his species 11 days ago. I said. Alone. Without weapons. Yes. Unarmed. Yes. And his opening statement is that he apologizes for the short notice. Those were his exact words. I looked at the compressed hull material of 17 enemy vessels under my feet. I looked at the personnel file of the man who had spent 6 months quietly saving 40,000 people from a war he had apparently seen coming before anyone declared it. I looked at Commander Reth, who had not slept in 36 hours and whose expression suggested she was reserving judgment until she had more information. Bring him in, I said. His name was General Colmarin, and he walked into the throne room the way someone walks into a room they have prepared for carefully but are experiencing for the first time, with the deliberate composure of a person making sure their preparation is doing the work. He was not what I expected. I am not certain what I expected. Someone performing confidence, probably. Someone who had calculated that arriving unarmed was a statement and was making sure the statement was visible. Someone conducting a diplomatic opening that was dressed as something more direct. He was not performing anything. He stopped at the appropriate distance, looked up at the throne with the expression from his personnel file, thinking about something other than what was directly in front of him, and then said at conversational volume, as though we were continuing a discussion that had been interrupted rather than meeting for the first time across a war. You have been winning very efficiently, he said. I thought you should know that was intentional. I looked at him for a moment. You wanted me to win, I said. I wanted the engagement to be clean, he said. Fast, clear, no casualties, maximum structural damage to things that were already scheduled for demolition anyway. It is much easier to stop a war cleanly than to stop one that has already cost something. You built structures in the corridor that were scheduled for demolition. We built structures in the corridor that served their purpose for 2 years and had reached the end of their operational lifespan, he said. The demolition was always coming. The timeline adjusted. I studied him. You have been planning this for 6 months. 8, he said. The expansion into the corridor created a situation that had a limited number of possible outcomes. I identified the most likely and began preparing for it. You predicted that I would declare war. I predicted that the expansion would be read as provocation, he said, with the specific precision of someone choosing words carefully without appearing to. Whether that became a formal declaration or an unofficial containment operation or something else, the response was going to involve military engagement. I prepared for military engagement by evacuating 40,000 people, by ensuring that the engagement would not have to cost 40,000 people, he said. There is a difference. The throne room was entirely silent. My personal guard, positioned at intervals along the walls, had the quality of stillness that comes from people paying very close attention while making sure it does not show. You are standing in my throne room, I said, in the middle of a war that your civilization is currently losing, without weapons, to tell me that you let me win. I am standing in your throne room, he said, to discuss whether we continue an engagement that has so far cost you 11 days of operational resources and cost us nothing except structures we were going to demolish anyway, or whether we have a conversation about what the corridor situation actually requires. You believe the war is pointless. I believe the war has already accomplished what wars accomplish, he said. You have established that the expansion will not continue unchecked. That point has been made clearly, and I have no intention of disputing it. The question is whether making it twice is necessary. I leaned forward slightly. You are negotiating. I am having a conversation, he said. Negotiations require a table and a document and people who have agreed in advance that they are negotiating. This is a conversation between someone who declared a war and someone who prepared for it, and both of them are now in the same room, which is an opportunity that does not require a table. Something happened in me that I did not immediately categorize. Not anger. Something more complicated. Sit down, I said. He looked around the throne room. There were no chairs on the main floor. The throne room was not designed for sitting. It was designed for declarations, for audiences, for the specific performance of absolute authority that required everyone except the throne's occupant to remain standing. He sat on the floor with the complete absence of self-consciousness of someone who had decided that the available options were standing or sitting, and sitting was more practical. I stared at him. "You sat on my throne room floor," I said. "You told me to sit," he said. "There are no chairs. The floor works." Commander Reth, from her position to my left, made a sound that she converted immediately into a cough. I looked at General Cole Marin sitting cross-legged on the compressed hull material of 17 enemy vessels and thought about 8 months of careful invisible planning and 40,000 people moved to safety and 11 days of a war fought against empty buildings. "What do you want?" I said. "I want to discuss the corridor," he said. "Specifically the boundary question, which is the actual issue, and which has a solution that neither side has formally proposed because neither side has been in the same room to propose it. You could have proposed it through diplomatic channels. Diplomatic channels take time," he said, "during which the military engagement continues and the situation becomes harder to resolve cleanly. I prefer clean." He paused. "Also, diplomatic channels require both sides to agree to use them. You declared war. You did not agree to diplomatic channels. So you walked into my throne room. You were here," he said. It seemed efficient. I looked at him for a long moment. In 31 years of ruling the Valorn sovereignty, I had conducted hundreds of audiences. I had received ambassadors and generals and supplicants and enemies. I had presided over surrender negotiations and alliance formations and the formal dissolution of 3 civilizations that had made the mistake of believing my patience was unlimited. Not one of those audiences had featured the other party sitting on my floor and describing the choice as efficient. "The boundary question," I said. "The corridor is 3 light-years deep and 11 light-years across," he said. "Currently it is contested, which means neither side can use it productively and both sides have military assets positioned in it that are not doing anything except existing in a state of readiness that costs resources. The corridor has 4 natural navigation points that are genuinely valuable for transit operations. 2 of them are closer to your space. 2 are closer to ours. You have surveyed the corridor. We have been in the corridor for 2 years, he said. Yes, the proposal, I said. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and removed a folded document. Paper. Physical paper. He unfolded it on the floor in front of him and placed 2 small objects at the corners to hold it flat. Formal boundary at the midpoint of the corridor, he said. The 2 navigation points in the inner half assigned to each side respectively. A joint transit agreement that allows civilian shipping from both sides to use all 4 points under a standard notification protocol. A permanent non-military zone in the central corridor extending half a light year on each side of the boundary. He looked up. The expansion stops, he said. The boundary is fixed. You have what you went to war for. We have transit access that we need for the outer settlements that were never going to stop being there regardless of how the conflict resolved. The throne room was quiet. I looked at the document on the floor, then at the man who had put it there, then at the document again. You had this prepared, I said. I prepared several versions, he said. This is the one that gives you the best argument for accepting it. You prepared the version that was easiest for me to accept. I prepared the version that was most likely to result in an agreement, he said. Those are not necessarily the same thing, but in this case they are. I was quiet for a moment. If I reject it, I said. Then we continue, he said. You keep winning efficiently and we keep losing things we have already replaced, and eventually the domestic political pressure on both sides produces a negotiated settlement that looks roughly like what I just put on the floor, except it takes another 8 months and costs more and neither side gets to say they proposed it first. Or I win decisively enough that there is nothing to negotiate. He met my eyes. You could try for that, he said. But you would need to go deeper into human space than the corridor, which changes the operational calculus significantly. And you would need to do it against an opponent who has been planning for this specific scenario for 8 months and has had time to prepare things beyond the corridor evacuation. He paused. I would prefer you did not try for that. I have done a great deal of work to keep this clean, and I would rather not undo it. The absolute composure of it. Not a threat. A statement of preference, expressed with the same directness as everything else he had said since walking in. You are not afraid, I said. I am very concerned, he said. There is a difference. What is the difference? He thought about it. Fear affects decision-making, he said. Concern informs it. I cannot afford the first right now. The second is what got me here. I looked at him sitting on my floor with his document and his two small weights holding down the corners and his complete lack of performance, and thought about 11 days of a war fought against empty buildings and 40,000 people who were somewhere safe because this man had looked at a situation 8 months ago and decided that the best way to stop a war from being costly was to make sure it could not be. You will understand, I said, that I cannot simply accept terms from a man sitting on my floor. Of course, he said. There is a process. I am aware of the process. This conversation is the part that happens before the process. The part where you tell me what you have already prepared. The part where we both understand what the agreement looks like before we spend 6 weeks with our respective legal and diplomatic teams arguing about the language, he said. It saves time. You are very focused on saving time. Time during an active military engagement costs things, he said simply. I prefer to cost as few things as possible. I rose from the throne. He did not scramble to his feet. He rose at a normal pace, the way a person rises when they have decided standing is now appropriate, and by the time I had descended the 3 steps from the throne platform he was standing, the document folded and back in his pocket, his expression the same as it had been since he walked in. I was a head taller than him. Most species were shorter than Valorn, which was sometimes useful and sometimes simply a fact. He looked up at me without adjusting anything. You planned for me to be taller, I said. I planned for the audience to be at your convenience rather than mine, he said. Height is part of that. You researched Valorn physical characteristics. I researched everything I could access about the Valorn sovereignty over the past 8 months, he said. It seemed relevant given the circumstances. And what did you learn? He was quiet for a moment. It was the first pause that seemed unplanned. The first moment since he had walked in where his response was not immediately available. That you have not lost a war in 300 years, he said. That your military record is consistent in a way that suggests the wins are not luck or superior technology but something more fundamental. That the civilizations you have engaged have almost always, in retrospect, been given opportunities to resolve the situation before the engagement escalated and did not take them. He paused. That you prefer clean. The last 2 words landed differently than the rest. You based your strategy on that, I said. I based my strategy on the belief that a ruler who prefers clean outcomes would respond to a clean offer presented at the right moment, he said. Before the engagement became costly enough to require a costly resolution. And if you had been wrong about my preference, then 40,000 people would be safe somewhere outside the conflict zone regardless, he said. The preference assessment affected the timing and the method. It did not affect the evacuation. I looked at him for a long moment. The evacuation was never about the negotiation, I said. The evacuation was about 40,000 people, he said. The negotiation is separate. There it was. The thing I had been circling around since Reth put the intercepts on the display 3 hours ago. He had spent 8 months and whatever resources and political capital the evacuation required not to win a negotiation or make a diplomatic point or position his civilization favorably in a post-conflict settlement. He had done it because 40,000 people needed to not be in a conflict zone. The negotiation was separate. Commander Reth, I said. Reth stepped forward. Empress, have the formal diplomatic chamber prepared, I said. General Marin and I are going to continue this conversation with a table. Reth's expression moved in a way she immediately controlled. Yes, Empress. I looked back at Cole Marin. You have an hour before the formal session. My staff will show you to a room where you can wait. Thank you, he said. The document, I said. You have 3 versions. He paused. Yes, bring all 3. Something shifted in his expression. The first thing that had crossed his face in this entire conversation that was not composure or precision or careful consideration. Something smaller and more human than any of those. Yes, he said. I turned to walk back toward the inner chambers. Queen Thessera, he said. I stopped, turned slightly. The corridor evacuation, he said. I want you to know that it was not personal. The expansion was not designed as provocation. The people who built those outposts were settlers, not soldiers. They were looking for somewhere to build something, not somewhere to threaten someone. I studied him. I know, I said. He absorbed that. Then why the war? He asked. It was the first question he had asked me. In everything since he walked in, he had stated and proposed and answered and clarified and not once asked me a direct question. Until now. Because expansion without acknowledgement, I said. is how sovereignties end, not suddenly, gradually, structure by structure, outpost by outpost, until one day the corridor is full and the boundary question answers itself, and the answer is not the one you would have chosen. I held his gaze. I was not willing to wait for that answer. He was quiet. I understand, he said, and the quality of it, not diplomatic acknowledgement, not strategic processing, but actual understanding, was something I had not expected from this conversation, which had already produced several things I had not expected. 1 hour, I said. I walked to the inner chambers. Behind me, I heard my staff moving to escort him, and then silence, and then the specific sound of the throne room returning to its normal state. I stopped in the corridor outside the inner chambers and stood very still for a moment. Reth appeared at my shoulder with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a decade. He sat on the floor, she said. He did, I said. No one has sat on the throne room floor in. I am aware. The document was pre-prepared. Also aware. Reth was quiet for a moment. Then, in the careful voice she used when she had an observation that was relevant but not strictly operational, he is not what the intelligence assessment suggested. No, I said. He is not. What did the intelligence assessment miss? I thought about 8 months of invisible preparation and 40,000 people, and a man who walked into a war zone alone and unarmed because he had calculated that the conversation was more important than the risk. That he means it, I said. The assessment covered his tactics and his record and his methodology. It did not cover the fact that the tactics and the record and the methodology are all in service of something he actually believes. What does he believe? I walked into the inner chambers. That wars do not have to cost what they cost, I said. And apparently he is willing to sit on throne room floors to prove it. The formal session lasted 6 hours. He brought all 3 versions of the document as I had asked. We worked through all 3. My legal advisors found 47 points requiring clarification. His responses to all 47 were prepared. Not as if he had anticipated the specific objections, as if he had anticipated the category of objection and had answers ready for any variation within it. By the 4th hour, 3 of my senior advisors had stopped objecting on principle and started engaging with the actual document. By the 5th hour, the conversation had moved from challenge and response to the specific collaborative problem-solving that only happens when both parties have decided they want the same outcome. By the 6th hour, we had a framework agreement initialed by both parties pending formal ratification. After the session, when the advisors had filed out and the room was quieter, I remained at the table reviewing the final document. Across from me, Cole Marin was doing the same, making small notes in a margin. You knew it would take 6 hours, I said. I estimated between 5 and 7, he said without looking up. The 47 objections. I had responses for 60, he said. Your advisors were more focused than I estimated. You should update your model. I will. He looked up. It was a good session. You have a low threshold for good, I said. 6 hours to a framework agreement that resolves an active military conflict with no casualties on either side, he said. My threshold is not low. This clears it. I looked at the document, then at him. You are going back to your command tonight, I said. The formal ratification process requires me to return to my authority structure, he said. Yes, tomorrow morning. And after ratification, he was quiet for a moment. After ratification, the corridor agreement requires a joint oversight committee for the transition period. The committee needs a liaison from each side. You, I said. That would be the logical assignment, he said. If your side agrees. I thought about 6 hours and 47 objections and a man who had prepared responses for 60 and sat on my floor and walked into a war zone alone because he had calculated that the conversation was more important than the risk. The logical assignment, I said. It seemed relevant to mention, he said, with the specific quality of saying something significant in the plainest possible terms. I looked at him across the formal session table. General Marin, I said. Cole, he said. I paused. Not at the familiarity. At the simplicity of it, the same simplicity with which he did everything, as if the most direct path between 2 points was always the right one and the only reason people took longer routes was that they had forgotten that. Cole, I said, the Oversight Committee convenes in 30 days pending ratification. Yes, he said, 30 days is a reasonable preparation timeline. It is, he said. I will inform my advisors of the liaison assignment. He nodded once, direct and simple. I rose from the table. He rose at the same moment, without the performance of deference that everyone else in my presence maintained as a constant background condition of our interactions. I had been ruling for 31 years. In 31 years, the number of people who had simply risen when I rose rather than managing the moment for strategic effect was a very small number. The throne room floor, I said. He waited. No one has sat on it in my lifetime, I said. You should know that. I will keep it in mind for future visits, he said. See that you do, I said. I walked to the chamber door. Behind me, the formal session room was quiet with the specific quality of a space where something had been completed. Queen Thessera, he said. I stopped. Thank you for the hour, he said. Before the session, for treating it as a conversation rather than a surrender. I was quiet for a moment. The corridor agreement is good, I said. It is good for both sides. That is unusual in my experience. It does not have to be unusual, he said. I looked back at him standing in the formal session room at the end of a 6-hour negotiation that had resolved a war, prepared, direct, entirely unperformed. No, I said. I suppose it does not. I left. Behind me the Valorn sovereignty continued as it always had, vast and old and certain of its own permanence. Ahead of me, 30 days away, a joint oversight committee was going to convene, and a human general was going to sit across a table from my advisors and be exactly what he was, without performance or strategy or anything except the direct and inconvenient honesty of someone who had decided that wars did not have to cost what they cost. I thought about what it would mean to govern alongside that. I thought it was going to require a great deal of adjustment. I thought that was possibly exactly what 31 years of uncontested sovereignty needed most. The war ended formally 19 days later. Not a single person had died. Cole Marin sent a one-line communication when the ratification was complete. Said clean. I read it 3 times. Then I sent back 2 words. This time. His response arrived within the hour. Said, next time too. I will make sure of it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Commander Reth and told her to prepare the Joint Oversight Committee chambers. We had work to do.